subscribe. Alright, now we're back, right? But look, before you watch this video, okay, it's a must that you watch the Ronald Strike Dunham / Lem Harris bio, okay? You have to watch that video first, okay? Once you watch that, you're going to see that I left a part out, right? And that's this part. Yes. The whole arrest fiasco, right? With the marijuana and everything. You know that Lem explained at the table. You guys remember that, right? And explained it to Kenny. Well, let's get into that actual story. Okay? Because, Rants is going to fill you in on the whole thing, detail by detail, okay? I gotta shout out, before we even started, I gotta shout out Calvin Richardson again. I mean, he's basically the executive producer for this video, all right? But you challenged Rants, and Rants accepted the challenge. So here you go. You got the right one, right? But yeah, you guys remember, right? Ronald Strike Dunham, he's on that train, right? Leaving New York, right? He leaves Brooklyn. He leaves Rodney Little. He leaves Andre. He leaves Victor, right? And, in that particular movie, his story's over. Or is it? Because you guys already saw the last video I did, the strike video. I already mentioned that he moves on to Chicago, right? He eventually goes to the hospital and meets Veronica. But it's some stuff that happens in between that I left out. And the reality of it is, he's on that train. We never saw Strike in school. He has no education, no job skills, no real money, no family waiting on him with open arms. He's just on that train, right? See, the only thing Strike knew was surviving, right? But Strike gets off that train in Chicago, and it's not because he wanted to be there, actually. See, he has a cousin that lives there. His cousin, Rick. Yeah, Rick, right? And you gotta understand, Rick is living in Stateway Gardens on the Chicago South Side. If you know anything about Chicago history, you already know Stateway Gardens wasn't no walk in the park. This is the mid-90s now, so the high rises is still up. Violence, gangs, drugs, all that's around you. You making it home, that's considered a good day. But Rick, he has a different dream, right? He wants to be a barber. Sometimes he'll cut his neighbor's hair. Anybody that's willing, let him practice, whatnot, on his cracked mirror and whatnot. He wasn't licensed yet, though. He couldn't afford barber school, right? Couldn't afford the booth rent, So this leads Rick to say, well, let me just cut hair out of my apartment. I live in the projects, right? $5 to get you a haircut, right? And this is where things get interesting. See, because most of Rick's customers just so happen to be gangster disciples. Rants isn't with all that. Rants is not with all that, for the record. But that's a GD neighborhood, so that's what they were, right? And Rick wasn't banging either, right? He's not trapping. He's not carrying no tool or nothing. He's just cutting the hair of the people who lives in his neighborhood, right? Because of course the hustlers, they gonna need a fresh lineup on a Friday. Rick can take care of that, right? And they usually tip the best, right? And Rick don't care where that money come from. He minds his business. He don't ask no questions, and they naturally respect that, because if anything happens to Rick, they can't get their hair cut, So Rick stays focused. He stays patient. He saves every dollar he can, hoping that he can one day leave Stateway Gardens. He wants to be a barber. He wants to own his own barbershop, of course, right? But then one cold afternoon, his phone rang and he's like, hello? Cuz, it's Strike. He's like, Strike? Like, yeah, I'm in Chicago. Where at? Union Station. Now, imagine being Rick for a second, right? You ain't heard from your cousin in years. Now he's calling from downtown Chicago. One duffel bag, no job, no place to stay. And he actually got some luggage with him, though, that he's carrying that's heavy, that's real heavy, that Rick will never see, right? Which is his past, right? But Rick does what any family member is going to do. It's like, yeah, man, where you at, man? I'm on my way. But little did Rick know, right? Picking Strike up from that train station, it's going to change both of their lives forever, right? So naturally, Rick, hops in his car, heads down to Union Station. On his way down there, he's thinking, like, I can't even remember the last time I seen Ronald. Probably was a family reunion. Their mothers were sisters. They grew up together before Strike's side of the family moved to Brooklyn years earlier, right? And Rick pulls up and he sees somebody look familiar. He like, hey, Ron. And of course, he spots him immediately. Same skinny frame, of course. Only difference is Strike looks tired now. Not physically, but mentally. Like he's carrying something around, right? And Rick pulls over, rolls down the passenger window like, come on, man, hop in the car and whatnot, right? They dap each other up, throws the bag in the back seat, right? Of course, they start driving to the south side. And Strike, he's looking out the window. He's seeing the skyline, the L train, of course, the Cubs stadium. But then they get further south, right? And the buildings start changing. If you guys from Chicago, you already know, right? The neighborhoods start changing, right? Then they finally pull in the Stateway Gardens. And Strike looks around. He's like, damn, this reminds me of Brooklyn. And Rick laughs. He's like, yeah, but don't let these buildings fool you. Chicago, they got their own rules, And the whole ride back, they catching up on life. Rick telling Strike, yeah, I'm cutting hair. I'm saving money for barbering school. I want to get my own chair, maybe even my own shop one day, And Strike is smiling. He like, that's what's up. And Rick asks Strike, so what happened in New York? Strike, gets quiet, looks out the window for a second. He like, long story. Rick like, it's all good. You don't got to tell me today. And of course, Strike moves in, right? He's sleeping on Rick's couch, one duffel bag in the corner, using a rolled up hoodie as a pillow, real grimy. Like every morning, Rick, he get up, he cutting hair. Strike, he get up, he's smoking cigarettes, watching the neighborhood wake up, watching the kids walk to school, watching the dudes stand on the corner, watching money change hands. See, Strike don't say much, but he notice everything, every car, every face, every routine. See, once you've been a clocker, you never stop observing. Now, naturally, Rick is like, Strike, you gotta pay what you weigh. So Strike is applying for jobs, just like you saw in Soul Food. He wasn't getting any work, and Rick like, man, what happened in New York again? Why'd you leave? And Strike like, look, I witnessed the 187, got caught up in an investigation, but I'm not on a run. And naturally, Rick is like, huh? Like, did this dude snitch? But he's like, look, I'm not a street dude, if you don't got no warrant, I don't want nobody busting in my house, So, at the end of the day, Rick putting up his money, he cut about 16 heads. Strike like, oh, that's how much money you made cutting 16 heads? Because around his way, he's seen dudes make the same money in 15 minutes. And Rick is like, well, it's honest money. And Strike is like, look, you're doing it all wrong. I was making $3,500 on my block every re-up. You're cutting 16 heads a day. $5 a cut? How much do you need to get licensed, Rick? How much is it going to be for barber school, for equipment? How much is it going to be for a down payment? And Rick is like, I don't know, maybe 10, maybe 20,000, I don't know. And Strike is like, so clearly it's going to take you forever to get that money. And Rick is like, look, I'd rather it take forever than end up deleted. And Strike gets quiet because he know he's not talking about Chicago, he's talking about Brooklyn, right? But Strike says, look, what if I told you we can make that money in 6 months? Rick is like, nah, man, I already know where this conversation going. My mother always told me every fast dollar got a slow consequence, Strike. And Strike like, look, we ain't selling crack now. You know, he's like, Rick like, what you talking about? He like, marijuana, weed. No corners, no violence, no kids, just adults buying what they already buy. And Rick's like, nah, I'm good, man. And Strike is like, all right. And then 2 weeks later, the rent is due, right? And Rick is short. He's been cutting all that hair, but he's short $250, right? Strike walks in with some groceries, gives him $400, right? Rick is looking confused. He's like, where did this money come from? Strike was like, man, don't worry about it. But Rick already knew, right? He already knew when he said that. Now, within another month, Strike, he started building relationships with some of these guys Ricky's been cutting for years. One of them told Strike while he was getting a cut in Rick's house, like, yeah, we moving weight anyway. We just need somebody we trust. They go Strike, right? He go back to Rick, like, yeah, look, hear me out. We building an empire. You know, we building your future. 6 months. You can get your shop. And Rick, he's looking out that apartment window, right? Looking at that tiny apartment. He like, all right, 6 months. All right, let's go. And business explodes, and it's not because they were big dealers. No, it's because everybody already trusted Rick. When you sit in somebody's barber chair, you tell him everything. He knows all the business. He just never used those conversations to his advantage, you know. But now those relationships became customers, you know. Strike's going to handle the deliveries. Rick is going to handle the connections. Everything should be clean. No violence, no robberies, no drama. You know, the money's stacking up, right? That shoebox under Rick's bed, hey, it's heavy now. It's not just holding haircut money. No, haircut hobby money. No. It's holding a dream now. And after like 2.5 months of being in Chicago, Strike looks at Rick. He like, you know, I need to stop answering to Strike. And Rick like, why? He like, because Strike belongs to Brooklyn. Every time somebody say Strike, I hear Rodney Little. You don't know who that is, but that was, you know, my man back in Brooklyn. But I also hear the detectives. I hear the, you know, the pow pow. And Rick is like, well, who you gonna be? And Strike is like, well, my middle name is Leonard. I never liked that name, but I think it could work out here. I think I'll just have people call me, you know, Lem for short, I guess. I'll go by Lem Harris. And from that day forward, nobody in Chicago knew Ronald Strike Dunham. They only knew Lem Harris. Eventually, people just start calling him Lem, right? Now, everything is going to plan until one mistake changed everything. One of Ricky's customers got picked up during a traffic stop. He's a notable member, and he tails on a higher-ranking gang member too, right? But, see, that arrest was supposed to happen because everything fell into place. See, what Rick and Lem don't realize is that the police have been watching them for the last couple months. Photographs, phone records, license plates, you know, controlled buys, everything, okay? And on one rainy Thursday afternoon, Rick and Lem, they loaded a duffel bag into Rick's car, and Lem looked over, he like, last run? Rick smiled, he like, yep, then I'm enrolling in barber school Monday. Lem laughed, he like, I told you we gonna get you there, man. They pulled away from Stateway Gardens. 3 unmarked cars slowly fell behind them. Neither cousin noticed. You know, the blue lights came on. You guys already know what happened. 1 jumped in front, 2 behind, blocked them. It was nowhere they could go. And they get arrested, right? Now, understand this. Lem is a stand-up guy. He stood up in court and told the judge, this was my idea. He admitted he was the one who convinced Rick that there was fast money to be made. He admitted Rick was trying to become a barber before he ever showed up in Chicago. He's in court taking full responsibility, right? And the judge looks at both men. Then he looks at Rick's attorney, right? And the judge said, well, you guys got to understand, Rick is the face that everybody recognized. His apartment is the place where everybody came and went. Those phones tied back to most of those customers came from Rick's phone. So yeah, Lem, even though you came up with the idea, the evidence painted Rick as a larger participant in the operation. Like, he's from Stateway Gardens. I hear you, you're from Chicago, but he would have had to get you involved with this gangster disciple nation, you know? So the judge sentenced them differently, right? Lem got a few months in Cook County. But Rick, he got a couple years in the Illinois Departments of Corrections. You know, Lem couldn't believe it. You know, he kept telling this lawyer, you know, that should have been me. And that led to the stomach stress, right? And that led to him going into the hospital and meeting Veronica. I got you now. I told you. But you're talking about, I guess we talk about Rick, right? Because you guys want to hear about Rick. Well, you guys see the thumbnail. You see the thumbnail, right? Rick. Yeah, that's Rickey Nash. Yeah, Rickey Nash from the Barbershop series. Rickey Nash. That's Lem's cousin. Strike's cousin. This whole time, you guys didn't even know that, though, right? But you learn something new every day, right? Now, if you like that story, this is what I do. This is what I do. Okay? Like and subscribe. Man, I'm about to start making playlists and everything, you know? Randumb Rants. Like and subscribe.